All right. Good afternoon. My name is Lasse Andersson, and welcome to Danish Global Culture Talks. It's a series of live talks that are debating art and culture here from Aalborg, Denmark, in collaboration with our friends Nordic.la, based in Denmark and Los Angeles. And it's generously supported by Spar Nord Foundation and the region of North Denmark. The talks have emerged out of an urgent need to debate the meaning and relevance of culture and art in a never-changing global context. And it's been even more relevant because of the COVID-19 crisis. We hope that you in the audience will take part and pose questions during the debate. To do so, use the chat function either on the website or on Facebook or the YouTube feed. We'll take a round of questions in the end of the session. Today's talk is also hosted by the LEGO Foundation. Thanks for that. And the theme is, in an ever-changing world, the ability to create and reflect, to reflect and collaborative become even more important. This session will focus on the role of arts and creativity with on learning through play and learning through the arts in new collaborative spaces and informal spaces for personal learning. To explore this, we have with us an artist famed for his art, inspired and developed with and by kids. We have a world-leading expert in learning through play. And last but not least, we have a director of tinkering that advocates for thinking hands and learning by construction. So, welcome, Ryan Gander.
Hello.
You are a British artist, established an international reputation through artworks that materialize in many different forms, ranging from sculptures, apparel, writing to architecture, painting, typefaces. As well as curating exhibition, you're also a committed educator, having taught at international art students. So welcome, and we'll have a swift tour soon, but I'll just go continue with the other guests. And welcome, Karen Wilkinson. You are director at the Tinkering Studio at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, and you have been committed to playful and inquisitive learning. You have helped and shaped the pedagogical approach of the Tinkering Studio, drawing upon deep interest in constructionism and studio thinking. And you have a background in both education and technology. And welcome to Bo Stjerne Thomsen. You are the Vice President and Chair of Learning Through Play at the LEGO Foundation. And the function of the chair is to be the expert of highest level to the executive leadership and on how children and adults learn to play and learn. So I'm so pleased to have you all here, spread around the world. That's the whole idea about the Danish Global Culture Talks. But one of the main things of this is that in this session we have either an artist, musician, with us, because what we are actually debating is what we all learn and experience and get from experiencing art and culture. So, Ryan, could you give us a tour at the studio in Suffolk?
Yeah, I'm going to float around.
Yeah,
with the high-tech Steadicam thing. It looks like I should have a cloud underneath me. So it's quite lucky that there's two things here, actually. There's three things here that relate to education, just by chance, which is lucky, that I can show you. But I was going to say to start with that I think everything is related to education, especially when we think about visual art. So, and I think maybe the worst art is the art that tries to be educational, because then it tries to tell you something and it becomes didactic. The idea of good art, like that, if I was to give it a definition, would be something that plays with risk and chance and the unknown. So, yeah, I mean, I think if you think of an interview and you think of a questionnaire, essentially the difference between those two things is one of those things, you know what you're going to get at the end of it. And the other thing, you don't know what you're going to get at the end of it. So for me, all good artwork is educational, and all good education is putting yourself in a position where you're uncomfortable and you don't know what the outcome is. And I guess the problem traditionally with, especially in the West, the Victorian models of education that we've employed and that we can't shake off is that we know where we're going. There's goals that we're told that we need to achieve, and we don't discover anything really for ourselves. That's the greatest sadness. So one of the works here, I'm going to just try and turn this around. This is, it's a den, you know, like kids make. So I think in America they're called forts. But this, it's made of marble. Don't ever touch artwork. You see? And essentially, I've got 3 kids. And like all kids from all cultures, from all places all around the world, kids make dens. And I think it's one of those innate, instinctive practices that we do. And it is ultimately play, but it's serious play because it's actually prototyping experiences. We make dens, obviously, because we need shelter, and like the things that are innate for children to do in prototyping experiences is make social systems, collect food, look for shelter, create relationships, all those things that humans need to do to survive. So when my kids make dens, which they do, in Britain we make dens usually with a sheet thrown over 2 chairs or over a table, and then we crawl inside it. Usually the kids are inside and they really think that this is a house, and they can imagine the kitchen and they can imagine the bedroom, and the grown-up that's with them, the parent or the caregiver that's with them at that time. I always find this, that when I'm in the den with my kids and they're playing, for them it's completely 100% real, but for me I'm just sitting under a sheet. And I think that's like the big difference between a child's imagination and an adult's imagination, is that they just have a more active imagination. It's better, it's better tuned, and it functions better. I think the other thing to say about these is there's quite a lot of them, because every time my kids make them, they get technically more elaborate because they're learning about architecture and structure and things. And also they get bigger because the kids are growing and the kids are getting bigger. So for me, they're like quite personal works. I mean, they go off into the world to collections and museums, but for me, it's a bit like a photo album, a family album, because they freeze moments in time of my children's development. And like, yeah, that's the great tragedy of being a parent, isn't it? That you desperately want to hold on to time that seems to slip by really quickly. And then the other thing that I was going to show you is there's a picture there. This is a work that I made in Liverpool called 5 Minds of Great Vision, and it's outside the Catholic Cathedral, which is an incredible building. And I'm from that area, so I used to like go there as a kid and as a teenager and sit on the steps with my friends. So what you're seeing in the foreground is benches that were made with kids. And the way that I made them was I built building blocks that is a dissection of the building itself, which are here. And then I gave them in workshops to a load of kids from Knotty Ash Primary School in Liverpool, local kids, and told them that we could make these really big. And they all chose to make these. I mean, they look a bit like they're actually outside, but I don't know if I should go out because the internet might cut off. Can you see them up there? Can you see them?
Yeah.
So I mean, all the kids made benches, which was quite interesting, but the benches seem very, let's see if I can, they look a bit like Russian constructivist benches or something, don't they? You see?
Yeah, They're great.
And what I like that, because when we think about public art, we think about art that is for the public. But I like the idea that we make public art and the public are given it to make. And the artist is just a facilitator in that. They just prepare a sort of, I don't know, like a set of rules or something to work within, or an impetus for it. And then the public make the work themselves. It seems like a logical way. Rather than making public art, it's like making art for the public, which is a nice way of looking at it. There is another work, but that relates to education, but it's less about children and more about my frustration with our conservative education system in art schools in Britain.
Yeah.
Do you want me to show you, or do you want to go on?
I think we could just show us it briefly, and then we'll go on, and then we'll arrange for another debate on that on another time.
It's endless. Yeah. So basically, it's in Britain we have GCSEs and we have A levels before you go to university, and the work it's this box on the floor. It goes near the door of a museum and it's left as if it's just abandoned. So I mean, it is a sculpture, but it's an A-level exam paper for art and design that I've written that the visitor to the museum can take away. And usually these exam papers are ridiculous because they take away any cognitive agility that the student might have and give them rules to work by, or make them, rote learning sort of strategy, where I've written it so that basically it's the hardest A-level paper that you'll ever do. And one of the questions is to write your own A-level paper.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan.
Pleasure.
And being the director of a museum that is also a marble palace, we at some point I have to show that then in the museum.
Yeah, make a new one.
Yeah. Thank you for a perfect introduction, and we'll move on. And Karen, perhaps it's also interesting. I had saying what does COVID-19 means for each of you, the guests seen from your different perspectives. But I think that perhaps it's also interesting to start off just getting an idea about what is the tinkering studio at the exploratorium actually.
Yeah, so I'll start by just sharing my screen just to give you a sense. Can you see this one?
Yeah. It's perfect.
So this is what the inside of the exploratorium looks like when we're not temporarily closed. It's filled with people, lots of activity, lots of noise, and interestingly, I would say from our perspective, we're thought of as a science museum, but we value art so deeply there. The blurring of those boundary lines is something that we really strive for. And I think, a couple of things that Ryan talked about that really resonated with us is tinkering is this process of really being comfortable, not knowing the answer. So being comfortable, being uncomfortable is, part of what we talk about as a tinkerer's mindset. But the tinkering studio is a place within the exploratorium really intended to slow people down and get them collaborating and talking with each other. So here's the irony. We're connected now, but we're also really disconnected. We're not together. So what's really changed for us is how to kind of hold on to what we value as an organization and really keep engaging with people. So one of the things that we value very deeply is kind of keeping the world a whimsical and wonderful place for children and families and teachers and young adults. So those are all people that you would find in the tinkering studio on any given day. And how in this time of lots of stressful times, how can we keep engaging and building those relationships and kind of keeping curiosity alive? So to us, thinking creatively about kind of how we pivot is one of those things. So I'll just share one quick strategy with you. We've done some things online. We've offered MOOCs and online courses and things in the past, but they've had a larger time scale. So what we really wanted to do, rather than lobbying expectations and sending information out into the world, we wanted to engage people in the phenomena of tinkering. So we've taken activities that we've tried in the tinkering studio, and if we walk our walk, a tinkering studio can be in a museum like the Exploratorium, it could be in a school, it could be at your kitchen table. So how do we really think about doing that with people? So we've taken activities, and actually the Lego Idea Conference went virtual. It was one of the first conferences that did. And that's what got us thinking about chain reactions, because we were supposed to be in Billund, our team, doing this with folks there. And we started these things online. And issued what we're calling invitations. So this one was around the world chain reaction. And what's been pretty phenomenal to us is over 30 countries have participated, families together, household to household, classroom to classroom, whole school districts, you name it, a lot of different ways of participating. But the impetus here is to make something offline come online together, to share it and kind of celebrate in the creativity and ideas of other people. And I think the phenomena is what's the really beautiful part. Ryan also talked about the artistic process as being, not knowing where your outcome will be at the end. That's also the beautiful part of tinkering. When you engage with phenomena, these two pictures, we're looking at light and shadow, both from the museum. But that phenomena itself, that scientific phenomena, is also artistically and aesthetically stunning. And we tried to do something at home with folks. So sharing on social media, a few prompts related to light and shadow, and using the hashtag light up our days. So people are looking for and creating shadows with cell phones and flashlights, anything you can find in the kitchen cabinets. Sunlight, if you take it outdoors, and trying to share ideas and inspiration with other people. And the whimsical nature of what's been shared and the variety has been something that we've really particularly valued.
Thank you, Karen. It's really interesting to see, and also kind of the transformation from a normal state into what is happening right now. So thank you very much. Perhaps, Bo, that's also kind of the cue. I know you will show us where you're sitting a bit later, but I could ask you what is top of mind at the Lego Foundation during the times we're in now? You can say we've just seen how Karen shows that how you can turn things around from being physically present into kind of learn on a distance. What is on your mind these days?
I think both Karen's examples and Ryan's also definitions of play in terms of playing with risks and taking chances into the unknown is a really good example, because Karen also mentioned our Lego Idea Conference, and the COVID-19 really started just a few weeks before we had our annual Lego Idea Conference. And it was all around creativity, where we were bringing 400 participants from more than 60 different countries to Denmark, and suddenly had to stop everything and turn it into an online conference. And that opportunity to think about uncertainty and risks, and then deal with it in creative ways, where you think about creativity as a mechanism or as a process to test and try out and deal with uncertainty, turn it into an opportunity, and then transform it into learning something new, I think is essential to what we think about as a foundation right now. Right now, we have basically changed our whole team to focus on action streams to deal with, also an urgency to focus on humanity, because really there's such a need right now in terms of creating meaning for people who are now isolated in different places, and being able to support not only funding for emergency situations, but also support for parents to do homeschooling, for teachers to find out technology ways to provide feedback and support. So I think the top of mind for us is really to provide the best support we can for our partners, for parents and for teachers. And it's quite a devastating situation. And the reason being because a range of different things are staggered on top of each other. So obviously it's very different from a single child in a family where both parents lose their jobs. There's not really support from the workplace. They don't have any kind of access to materials, stimulation. They don't really know have equipped with knowledge. But some other families might be stressed by just like taking on the role of education and learning, and still keeping children tied to traditional forms of learning. But it's really staggered because there's even an increase in poverty. There's increase in what we say is a learning crisis because you don't have access to what you usually have. But it's also a challenge in accessing your traditional social networks. So that's really, it's a massive change, but it's also a fantastic opportunity to think and rethink some of the opportunities we have in the ways we can use creativity and play and the arts and the opportunities we have in our everyday environment to learn.
Thanks, Bo, for a really good insight. And you would say we have had this debate on everything happening around us, and you would say it's to some extent it's horrible, but we also say that we have to keep saying what is also interesting and what is happening because of all this, because we start to invent new things. But you can say actually, Ryan, Bo, he talked about how it is actually that there's a lack in terms of what the ability to do education. So my question to you, saying, how has homeschool been in the Gander family?
Chaotic, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, our household's quite creative and a little bit, non-conformist anyway. So they have a lot of that side of the brain sort of thing. So if anything, we've just tried to. I feel a little bit like it's the school that keeps them on the straight and narrow and gives them structure, because we let them go and do things and take chances. But it's difficult actually, and it's interesting how much more I appreciate what teachers do. That I found that mind-boggling, because I'm in that situation where I can dip in and out and get involved and get inspired and excited and then go away. But the repetition of it is quite, it's been traumatic, to say the least. Yeah.
All right. Could you say, Ryan, seen from your side, from the art world or being an artist, what do you see? Do you see any interesting things kind of surfacing out of the situation we are in now?
Yeah, I see artists taking control. I mean, if you think about the history of art, artists have always had control of the systems that show and distribute art, all those mechanisms. Historically, I mean, the curator is really quite a new invention. And if you think about the history of art, and you think about salons, and you think about art schools that were artist run and artist run spaces, in the last 2-3 decades, a lot of these things were on the slowdown and disappeared. So what I'm seeing is artists doing things for themselves, creating the platforms to disseminate and distribute the art, not just make the art. And of course, like, making the art is only 50% of the job. There's the title, the context, the place where you exhibit it, how it's unraveled, the exhibition device, targeting different types of audiences. All those things give information towards the work. That is essentially the work. So, and of course, like, in a more general thing for the whole of society, it feels like what's been happening recently is we've been living in this era of social acceleration and capitalist acceleration for so long. we're caught in the momentum of it, and it felt like we would never get out of it. And that is the thing that, I mean, the most detriment to society and to the planet and to our history, all these things, is social acceleration. And it feels like what's happened has broken that cycle a little bit, and people have been made to step outside of it and see, you know, have a detached view of themselves and see themselves in their life the way it was. And I think that sense of perspective and overview and like self-empathy is really, really healthy. I mean, I think everyone, I can feel it, that I felt like I was people call this lockdown like Groundhog Day. For me, Groundhog Day was before. I'm only just noticing now. I was just doing the same things every day. And yeah, there's loads of tragic and terrible things that have been a product of the situation we're in. But I feel totally alive, and I know that other people feel alive. It's like the closer you get to the edge or to danger, the more that you risk, and the closer you see the end somehow, the more you feel alive. Your emotion is accelerated rather than time being accelerated.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've lived in like time famine, haven't we, for quite a while now, where everyone's always saying, oh, I wish I had more time. I don't have enough time. Yeah. You know, if I had 10 minutes, I'd do this. And yeah, it's nice to have time.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. I'll try to kind of just briefly sum up. And I have just one question also from the audience that I think would fit here. But I think actually things about being uncomfortable. And I really like your kind of idea about, Karen, saying, how can we be comfortable about that? I think that's quite
yeah.
good that way. And Bo, you mentioning, and it also builds on what Ryan said. And Bo, you also talk about uncertainty. So, and you can say perhaps you would elaborate, but Bo, just put in this question from the audience saying, on social media, many want to portray themselves in an unrealistic good light. Furthermore, there's a pressure to move quickly from education to permanent work. We find that children and adults today become more afraid of making mistakes, thereby limiting their creativity. And that could be a question for you, Bo, or for Karen.
Okay. Oh, please, Karen. I think that's a good prime overview. I can follow up.
No, I was going to say, I just feel like in a time like this, I think it's good for us to really question what's happening in education, and really gives parents an opportunity to look at learning in a really new way. But I think the thing that the questioner asked about mistake making, this feels like a narrative that really needs to be switched. Mistakes are not to be avoided. They're a natural part of the learning process. And that discomfort that Ryan was talking about, that leads to real learning. If you're not making a mistake, if you're sort of following along kind of with information in a rote or a didactic approach, that's really no way to learn in a meaningful way. So how can we be engaging families, especially at a time like this, to look really carefully at what they're doing with their children? We want to keep it light too. I will say, I think there's a lot of expectations and things being lobbed at families that's not so healthy. So how are the ways that we can engage, think about learning really creatively, but allow for those qualities that are real, that tinkerer's mindset that I talked about developing? What does it take to come up with an idea and bring it into a physical reality? There's a lot of tinkering in that process, no matter what the topic is or the content of the work that you're working on.
It feels to me a bit like children don't mind feeling uncomfortable. It's the parents that see their children and see their behavior as illogical or strange or weird that stigmatize the kids not to do illogical and experimentative things. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It feels like there must be a valve in the brain. I don't know anything about cognition or any science. I'm just making this up. But I feel like there's a valve in the brain that opens, that lets you do things that other people might think are a little bit mad and crazy because they have no logical outcome like earning money, giving you immediate gratification, preparing for the future, all these things that logically we need to do to survive. They're just done for the sake of doing. And it's fine to play because it's called play. But as soon as you start playing as an adult, if I was to wander around the studio chatting to myself about some crazy imaginary story, people would probably think that I had mental health issues. But this, it's almost like play and imagination is stigmatized in adults. That's the problem, I think.
What do you say, Bo?
No, I think that's generally also the perspective we see. Like what Ryan really illustrates, talking to oneself, is called self-regulation, right? That's when you have so many things to deal with and you have ideas. That's also what children do. They speak up loud to be able to express what they do and to sort their thinking. And I think what you learn from children is that kind of natural ability to call out what they see and do and express it in multiple ways. I actually been quite, surprised in many ways with the honesty that people have been leaning into online meetings and dialogues. We are basically looking into the living rooms and the bedrooms and the offices of our colleagues like every day. And suddenly there, children are peeking in and the dog is running around and so forth. And I think I've been quite impressed with that kind of honesty, even we're trying to cover our backgrounds and so forth. But I think there's a few very important things in terms of the link to arts and creativity. The fundamental shift I see right now is that for many years we have been talking about a new set of skills that are really important. Like, it's not only about knowledge and memorizing facts and being able to understand concepts. It's really about resilience, creativity, critical thinking in terms of information technology we seek. And it's about new ways of collaborating. If anything proves that there's a need for new things, new skills, and a new way of learning, I think this is really what proves that point. And as a starting point right now, arts is just the most excellent way of expressing your social emotional well-being and talk about what really concerns you, and then using creativity to come up with alternative scenarios to how you can feel a sense of belonging, how you can make sense of things, and how you can think about alternatives. So the main advice we have been doing is, like, beyond love and care and listening, which is the most important, then engage children in creative activities for them to express in words, in painting, in drawing, in music, how they feel right now, and being able to make sense of things around them. And don't start any kind of traditional learning activities which would be related to any kind of sitting still and doing drill. And then imagination, that ability to think back and forth in time and come up with alternatives is not only related to coming up with new ideas or solutions, which is really what testing and trying out things is, what Karen illustrated. It's also thinking alternative about what you can do as a human being in a situation that's difficult, as a family, coping with this, trying out new things. So playing and arts expressions is just so much more important now than ever. And what we do emphasize is all of that is learning. Like, do not think about learning as a worksheets and reading books and sitting at school desks only. It's about physically moving around. It's touching and trying out things. It's looking at heights, like quantities and densities, and counting things. It's about building a sculpture, look how big it is, and trying to formulate with words, what does it look like? Like, how do I define a terminology and a language of what I see? So language and mathematics is all expressed in how we right now can use our arts and creativity in that. So I think it's a new way of looking at things that I hope the everyday creativity can launch that.
Great. I would just say that also we say about where we are allowed to look, in people's living room, and kind of. So you can also say today we are looking at Karen sitting in Sea Ranch, which is kind of, in my terms, one of my favorite piece of architecture. And we are looking into Ryan Gander's studio that you won't do every day. And Bo, you are sitting in the Lego Ideas studio, and you'll just show us around in a few seconds. And I'm sitting in the last building by Jørgen Utzon that did the Sydney Opera House. So you can say that we also get to look into places that we wouldn't do on a Thursday night. So it's also about opening up the world in a strange way, even though we are confined to each of our places. So Bo, I don't know if can you just kind of show a little bit where you're sitting, or is that possible?
Yeah, I'll definitely try out my best with the camera I have here available.
Yeah, I know.
But yes, I'm sitting in the Lego Idea Studio in the Lego Idea House, which is basically the birthplace of the Lego Idea, and it's a house where Ole Kirk built back in the early 19th century. And what's quite interesting, I think, in this situation is that the Lego Idea was basically born out of the Great Depression in Denmark in the 1930s. So the place we're sitting here is, the birthplace of Lego as a concept, as playing well, as an idea, which emerged during a crisis. And I'm trying to use my camera a little bit because you can't see from the outside what the house is, but you can see that I have brought a little model of it. So this is basically the house I'm sitting in, right here. And then I'm in the Lego Idea Studio, which is a space like that's my son. A space in here where we have a range of different kind of arts activities developed with our partners. So for instance, here we have different kind of tinkering activities. So this is a little similar to what Karen was showing just a minute ago. And it's basically a space that's built around the idea that you can take apart and rebuild everything in this room. So the furniture is something where you can download the drawings and then you can rebuild it yourself if you have a local manufacturer. It's co-designed with GXN, a Danish architecture company. And the Lego idea is on our wall down here. So the Lego idea basically say that you can basically build anything you can possibly imagine with Lego bricks as if they were glued, and then you can take them apart and reconfigure into a new idea. So this idea about iteration, experimentation, recombine things, and that's really how we learn. We learn by testing and trying out things, evaluating, reflecting, and creating new things. And that's really fun. It's really frustrating sometimes, it's complex, it's difficult, but it's really, really fun. And what we have around here is to test out many of these things using Lego bricks, obviously, but a range of other experiments. So right here, we have also different kinds of work with mirrors that we're testing out, like how do things distort. This is Storm, my son, distorting things with mirrors. And here we have a low-key version of Light Play, which we co-developed with Exploratorium and Radio Emilia and the MIT. So a range of these activities are developed with our partners. So it's basically our little kind of studio where we can test and try out things. And just imagine, that this is really, back in the 1930s, where the Great Depression was here, and Ole Kirk has his carpenter shop. He had nothing else to do because no houses were built. He basically sat down on this floor, look at the scrap wood, and try to build, wooden toys with his children. I think we can, like the Black Death, like in the 14th century, which was the emergence of the Renaissance. I think there's fantastic opportunity to think about this. How can we rethink a little bit how we educate, how we learn, and how we can use creativity to rethink our cultural, social landscape right now.
Thank you, Bo. And I think actually that there's another comment from one in the audience. She's called Denise LeBlanc, and she's saying that it might be time to help families see and reflect on the skills they are developing, what self-directed play and learning they are engaged in, cooking, creating, hacking, and inventing around mask making, etc. When we are at home, that we are actually engaging in things that we don't have time in normally, I think she would say. But I'll just move on because Karen, I'm quite, and then we'll also take Ryan back in the discussion. But Karen, you're heading the Tinkering Studio, and it's both kind of art and science, or you can say most science and then art.
You can't say one or the other, but I would just to build on something that Denise's point brings up for me. Yeah. I feel like activity without reflecting on what you're doing is not so meaningful. So that's what art really allows you to do. That's what the tinkering process really allows. So when you can't tell the difference between, is this an art activity or is it a science activity? That is a great tinkering opportunity in my mind. And I think, too often, as a criticism, I would say art gets pushed into this corner of almost decoration, and people don't take it seriously. Science has the opposite problem. They attach a seriousness, and especially in times right now, COVID, it is going to get solved by science, and that is serious, but creative thinking is what gets us there in the end. So it's not only important in a family's living room, it's important for countries and the way we're going to think about this, but the way that those two things come together, not seeing those disciplines as separate. Artists are noticers, scientists are noticers, and as a few of you, both of you really mentioned this, so are kids. And that process that we learn as children to be curious, kind of problem solvers and noticers is something that we tend to suck the joy out of that process going into adulthood. And I think that's something that we should be really reconsidering at the moment. Spending all the time that we are at home and having a close-up look at what learning should look like, could look like. It really is time to kind of reimagine some of those things and use the technology in ways that are also creative. This allows us to connect in ways that we haven't otherwise. I mean, we were connected with families in Ecuador and Madagascar yesterday. I mean, what an amazing opportunity. But it's also not to say you don't want kids in front of screens for 12 hours a day. Like, that screen time should be precious. What does it allow us to do when they're spending time on screens? How to do that creatively. Anyway, I'm just interested in thinking about those kinds of things, tinkering with what that model is now and how it can look, beyond this. We're going to get through this, but what are the things that we're learning from and kind of iterating on right now that we'll hang on to post-COVID?
So Ryan, kind of reflecting on what Karen is doing, tinkering and actually learning kids new things in that process. You are looking at kids doing what they are. Are you actually doing the same kind of?
No, of course not, because I'm a grown-up. And all grown-ups tell children to stop daydreaming. And it's funny, actually, because when you were talking before, I just remembered a couple of weeks ago, my middle daughter, Penny, she was making one of those things in the kitchen that kids make where they get a bowl and they put some pasta in and some cornflakes and then some silver cake decorations and they mix it all up. Then they put some milk in and they make a big mess that you can't eat. And I said to her, "What are you doing? That's ridiculous. You're wasting food." And what's interesting about that is that I should have known better than to say that to her, because although I knew she was making a mess, she didn't know the outcome was going to be that mess. But the other thing that it tells me is that I have a lot to learn as well. And I think that's a healthy perspective, that there's too many grown-ups who feel like they've learned things and those things will stand the test of time and they don't need to learn anything else. But as we've seen from the last few months, the world changes around us incredibly quickly and we need to relearn every day, because the things that we once learned at school, they don't mean anything anymore. So I think that maybe we're looking in the wrong place. Maybe we shouldn't be trying to educate children. Maybe we should be trying to change the mindset of the grown-ups to be a little bit more, well, to encourage lifelong learning and not have adults be ashamed of the fact that they're learning. I mean, I think adults feel like learning suggests you don't know and therefore it's a failure. So there's something in this whole cycle about adults learning, not children learning.
So, Bo, so we should skip learning kids new things, just unteach all the grown-ups what they learned in the past.
Well, I think what we have seen is that adults have a ton of things they can learn from children, particularly how effective children actually are in learning new things. Like, imagine how fast they learn to walk and talk with without now before they get to school, and the reflective questions they have. But also, adults also have certain kind of reflections and attention and thoughtfulness. So we usually, observe in which way there can be quite a good dialogue and between adults and children. But one of the interesting things, actually, speaking about what Ryan was saying, like beyond, playful parents or parents who can take risks and who understand uncertainty also are better able to support children in dealing with uncertainty and coping. So there's a natural kind of ability or relationship between parents and children, adults and children. But what has been seen, one of the only ways to increase flexibility in thinking of adults is to have them observe children. And there's some really good studies from science centers coming right now, right recently, from one of my colleagues, Garrett Yeager, who have studied things like that, what was being done at the exploratorium and Karen's work here, like in science centers when adults observe children testing and trying out things without having like assumption of what the outcome necessarily might be, they also get with that flow and deal more cognitive flexible with solutions. So I think in terms of dealing with flexibility and thinking out of the box, adults certainly can learn and from children. And I think I've observed that with my own children right now, spending even more time at home. Like if you actually deal a little bit with uncertainty and just say, well, actually, I don't know how we do this. Like I don't really know what we're going to have for dinner. I don't really know what we have and what we can do. They actually usually go in with a mindset to, well, maybe we could try this. They really want to help. They really want to figure things out. And that's a great learning opportunity and a collaborative opportunity to do things together. So that honesty is a really nice starting point.
Yeah, I think it's been really, really interesting, and we've spent like 45 minutes now. And I'll just give us a little bit more time. And I think actually we have one from the audience, because of course I'll sum up and say all the good things in the end. But that's a good question, saying that so kind of the last thing from each of you, and perhaps you first, Karen. What do you hope that people will continue to do post-COVID? Something that you have seen, like. Yeah.
I think the sort of reimagining and reconsidering what learning looks like because of this close-up perspective we have right now. I hope that's something that will carry forward. I think it really is about learning together. As Bo was talking about, like, think about the message this sends to your children, having them hear you make a mistake and be okay with it, playfully figure out what to do next. I mean, those are things, they sound frivolous. They're really not. There's a basic humanity around all of this. So not only the way we connect to each other and our families and the people who are close to us, but realizing that we're all in this together. This isn't an isolated thing. And how to think about parenting, schooling, day-to-day work. And I think, from a museum perspective, there's a lot to learn there and there's a lot to share there, but it's ultimately relationships and kind of making that creative and playful spark be a natural part of the way people grow together in and out of school.
Thanks, Karen. And Ryan, what do you say from Suffolk?
I think this is... my brother sent me a message the other night and he said that this could be the second Enlightenment. And I thought that was such an amazing observation, because I was thinking of this as the biggest human lesson in humility. Because for so long we've thought that we are so important and so powerful, and that this planet that we're on and the animals that are on it and everything else the stuff we don't know, we thought we knew. And yeah, I feel humbled. So I hope that people go away and they remember how tiny we are, and also remember that this is probably like, that they should embrace the small things. It feels like the era of small things, and small, I started to realize how important small things are, like cooking dinner. What an adventure cooking dinner with the kids could be, or trying to buy chickens when you're not allowed to go out. Everything's a challenge.
Thanks, Ryan. And Bo, what do you say?
Just building on this also, I think that everyday perspective has been really revealing. But most important for us, the skills that are really needed to be dealing with society and work life is really about creativity now, and critical thinking and new ways of collaboration. So we can really move towards a different dialogue. It's not only about knowledge and knowing things. I think that's a really eye opener, I hope, for many. And then that happens between schools and homes. We're not sending our children to schools to learn everything in this world. Actually, there's so much meaning making and belonging and materials and thoughtfulness and caring at the home, which is about learning and playing. And schools and homes can make that a collaboration, instead of thinking about the dichotomies between home and school and play and learning and arts and education.
Thanks to all of you. It's really been interesting, and I promise to invite you all to Aalborg and the museum when it's possible to meet again at some point. I would just say that you can say one of the reasons why we had these talks, that I were looking at the curriculum when everything went online in middle of March in Denmark. Then all creative artistic curriculum were kind of closed. So you could say that in the Danish kind of context. So, and I think that kind of tinkering and what Bo is doing and what Ryan is also doing, that's about kind of creating also the informal spaces for learning. And that's where kind of all creativity moved. It's like the cultural institution, or it's like in each personal homes and these kind of things. And we cherish it when we talk with politicians, but when we are in a crisis, there's a chance that we forget. So that's also why we have these talks, kind of reminding us also when we are opening up that we have to stick to this. And people are really doing so great things. Ryan, I really love the marble tent and how it's you just sitting under a blanket and your girls just in another world, and Karen also seeing what you're doing. And Bo, I have to visit the Lego Ideas house. I haven't been there yet.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, I'll come back. But for now, thank you so much. And I'll just say to the audience that on Tuesday we have another talk, and we'll kind of dive into another discussions on how culture can be a part of creating also businesses. So we'll have the founder and chairman of Astralis, which are #1 on the esport, what is it called? Yeah, one of the first-person shooter games. I should know, but it's sorry. And we also have the creative director of Heartland Festival that mixes music and literature and culture, and we have Simon Kvam, who's a famous Danish rock star, and we'll debate how do we create a business on this, because we can dream of a lot of things, but we also have to turn it into something we can live off, but in new interesting ways. So thank you everyone, and see you next Tuesday.
Thank you everyone. Thank you. See you.
Thanks.